Hi again, everyone.
Hey,
It's
everybody.
Kim and Andrea.
Andrea.
You're going to get sick of seeing us today. But we are here today with Head of Design Jesse. Welcome, Jesse. And he has a great presentation for us, and then we're going to do some Q&A.
Perfect. There we go.
All right.
So I want to start off by saying thank you for joining us. This is kind of a different type of session than you may have been attending the last day or two. Really, we're focused in my team on trying to meet your needs from your perspectives. Like we want to build a user interface and a user experience that works for you and makes things that are really hard a little easier. So what I really was after when I said I wanted to speak today was I wanted to give you an idea of how we work on this side of things, but I also want to hear from you. So that's kind of what's going to make or break this session. I really, if there are no stupid questions, if you have anything that you've been stuck on in Stratify before or in Scoutify, or if you've been one of our beta testers for ScoutX, those are the kinds of questions I want to hear, like how do I do this? Or why does this work this way? Or is there a better way to do this? Or is there something missing? So I want you to start thinking about your questions now, because my part of the presentation is going to be really short, and then it's going to be kind of off the cuff, and I really do want to hear from you. So really, I want to apologize in advance too if we get a lot of questions. I'm going to do as many as I can. I'll answer as many as I can, as completely as I can. But if I can't get to all of them, please feel free to reach out to me in a private message here during the rest of the event, and I'll be happy to get back to you and answer any questions that I don't get to here. So let's start off with just saying a little bit about me, like who I am and why do I care? Like that's really the knuckle that really I have to break here. I'm trying to figure out what I'm passionate about in my life. I have a background in design. I started in advertising, and I kind of found my way pretty quickly to technology. And I found out that in addition to being a designer and somebody who loves things that are beautiful and simple, I also really enjoy puzzles, and code is a great way to solve that or scratch that itch. I came to InventoryLab after working in technology in larger companies, larger advertising firms, and it was just such a great fit because I have a company who thinks the same way I do. I want to solve problems for people. I want to make sure that I solve them in a way that makes things easier. I also want to make something that people enjoy using. And in advertising, I was spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to manipulate people into bringing them into what we wanted them to do. And it felt kind of backwards to me because I really, as a person, care about people and what they want to do and how to help that happen. So I got started in technology pretty early. I built a Flash-based website when I was in high school. And for those of you who are in any way familiar with web technology, Flash websites were kind of, pun intended, a flash in the pan. It's a bunch of designers trying to create websites that do fun, interesting, like very pretty things before the web technology that we use today caught up to being able to do that. So Flash was our way, and it was awful. It was so kludgy and so hard to do, and you had a lot of technology that was not well documented, and basically it was the first time I ever found myself on a website called Stack Overflow, which if you've ever worked in the web, that's where anybody goes if they have a question, and that's just kind of like all the experts in the same room talking to each other, kind of like Facebook for coders. But web's come a long way since then, and I have too. And as a designer, I've kind of grown a lot more than I thought I would, because I always thought when I began my design education formally that design was going to be about making pretty things. It was going to be making things that people looked at and go, wow, that's so cool. And it really, I mean, some designers do stuff like that, especially if you're creating a Super Bowl commercial or something like that. But when it comes to the kind of design that I do, we're really trying to solve super complex problems and make things that are complex seem simple. And this quote that I'm showing you, it's one of my design heroes. Johnny Ive is a designer who used to work at Apple. He does a lot of hardware design. He also dabbles in software design, but he also had to solve and has to solve complex problems as a designer. And he basically just said, it's not about taking everything away and making it seem simple. It's about making sure that you don't remove the important things, but that you bring the order that people need to that complexity. And that's what I really am driven by. So officially, I'm a user experience, user interface, and front-end developer. I've been working in this space for nearly 20 years. I've been with InventoryLab since 2016, so about 7 years now. And as I mentioned, I'm really obsessed with finding simple solutions to complex problems, and Stratify is a great place to work in that space. I really get to solve some fun problems for our users. A lot of times I create my own problems by examining things a lot in our interface that we have and trying to figure out how to do it better. We've been working on that for the last couple of years as we've been rewriting areas of Stratify to be a little bit easier to use and more mobile friendly, and it's been a fun challenge. I really want to note too that I thrive on hearing how my designs are working for you, or not working. I mean, that's kind of the tenet of being a designer. We're going to really enjoy hearing great things about people loving our designs, but I actually much more enjoy hearing how things are not working because it gives me a next step. It helps me to understand where we have to go next, what we have to fix, or what we have to do better. So I said a couple things that some people might not be familiar with, so I'm just going to do a really quick definition of those things. As a user experience designer, it means that I'm trying to take some time to plan how we're going to walk you through a more complex process. And I wear that hat first because that's where we start. UX is a lot of conversations. It's a lot of mind mapping. It's a lot of like more non-tangible things. I'm not building anything. I'm not making colors happen yet. I'm not doing typography. I'm working on the plan. It's kind of like a roadmap for where we're going with the experience. And when we finish with that, I move on to my user interface designer role, which is basically making the buttons and the layouts and everything that you use in Stratify. And that gives us kind of like the skin on the skeleton, so to speak. The user experience is the skeleton, the user interface is the skin. And then the front-end developer role is kind of my last step in my process. And that's when I actually take the time to write the code that builds what you're using today in Stratify. A lot of times I kind of bounce back and forth between these roles, but I would say that really all of them are different needs and all of them are all necessary to build what you guys use and to work on future projects. So a couple of places in Stratify where I've really spent a lot of time. I want to just walk through a couple of my favorite pieces of UI that I've built and why I like them and why I think they were an improvement over what we currently had. So the first area of our rewrite when we started working on bringing Stratify up to kind of some modern standards for design standpoint and from a backend standpoint was Scout. And it's where we started because it was one of the more simple areas of the application. It allowed us to kind of work both on Scout and on a component library that we've used to build our interfaces. So that's things like the buttons and the search bars and the search results and all of that stuff. It was a really fun challenge because Stratify as a whole is a very complex application by nature because what you guys do is complex and there's a lot of different needs. So we wanted to make sure that when we were building these interfaces, we took something that was complex and we not only made it simpler, but we also focused on mobile design. So all of the areas where we're rewriting in Stratify are mobile friendly. So you can pick up your phone while you're outsourcing or doing anything else and you can use it there. So another one that I really like for a totally different reason is the bulk edit area in FBA where you can kind of bulk edit your replenishments. And I think there's a lot of fun interactions here, particularly when it comes to dragging across multiple fields and editing the value for all of them at the same time. But my favorite piece of bulk edit is actually the collaborative approach that we took to it. So you can actually have multiple people working on the same bulk edit experience at the same time. So if you have sub accounts in your InventoryLab account and you're working with somebody else who might not even be in the same room, they could be across the country or whatever, and you get to kind of collaborate together, you can see where the other person's at. It's kind of akin to what you see when you're working in like a Google Doc or something like that, and you're both kind of making suggestions and edits at the same time. And that was a fun experience to tackle because we, again, had to make a pretty complex process seem fairly simple. Insights, specifically the restock report. This was a very recent effort and a long one because it's one of the first areas that I got to work on in Stratify where we designed something brand new from the ground up. And as a designer, that makes me giddy because I don't have to take something and try to rework it to make it work with our new goals, whether it's trying to make it mobile friendly or whatever. It was just like, here is a blank slate. This is what we want to do. These are the things that we want our users to be able to do. Now make it happen. And it was a great task and a great team that worked on this, and I really enjoyed it. I particularly like in this interface the fact that we started taking an approach that allows our individual users, you guys, to just customize it to how you want it to be. A lot of the areas that we have in Stratify right now are pretty locked in. Like you can't change much about them. You might be able to sort a table or filter something out, but in this particular interface that we designed, you can take columns away. You can add things like custom views. You can do sorting and filtering like you can elsewhere in Stratify, but you can also just everything that you do with this report is remembered, and it basically just becomes your report as opposed to your information in our report, if that makes sense. And the last one that I really enjoyed, and this one was one of my more recent efforts, and it was driven by my passion for accessibility, is dark mode. It's a pretty common thing across a lot of applications now, so it might kind of seem like we're just following along, but there's a really specific purpose for things like dark mode, combating things like eye fatigue for people who are working in evenings, but it also helps with people who have a hard time visually with contrast. And that was one of the really great side effects of this, is that it forced us to do some testing on contrast within our applications so that our users who have a visual deficit can actually benefit from dark mode, even if they're using light mode, because it allowed us to find some issues with our UI in both dark and light mode that we fixed. So it was a great little project, a fun little side project for me, but I think it's really going to benefit users. And if you haven't tried it out, give it a shot. So all that to say, that's me in a nutshell. That's what I do at IL. But the important thing that I need to stress is that I'm personally invested in the long term, because I've been here for 7 years and I plan on being here for a lot longer, in making sure that our products are able to be attractive, easy to use, and feature rich. And that's driven by you guys, for real. That is the only place that I get that information. If I'm not hearing from our users, whether it's through our customer champions or through talking to our beta testers, then I'm making guesses at best. So your feedback is absolutely critical. And that's not just talking about now, that's talking about anytime. If you have an issue or you have a feature that you see that's missing or that you think needs to be added, our customer champions are there every day listening, and all of that information comes back to me and our team, and we absolutely listen, and we do use it daily. So please chime in if you want to, or even if you feel uncomfortable, go ahead and chime in anyway. There's no stupid questions. So a few ground rules real quick before we start the Q&A. I want to keep it focused on interfaces and experiences inside of our products. If you can, keep them short so that I can do a quick answer and get as many answers in as possible. If not, don't worry about it. Again, still no stupid questions. You can ask about anything related to the design of InventoryLab. It doesn't matter whether it's a button color that you don't like or a super complex experience that you feel like should be a lot simpler. Just fire away. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I have a thick skin. It's part of being a designer. That's like we actually take classes when we're going through design school on taking critique. So I don't care if you're polite. I don't care if you're rude. I want to hear what you have to say. So with that being said, let's answer some questions.
Awesome. We have a couple already.
Fantastic.
All right. So first question from Rena is, how did you guys get your colors?
That's a great question. Actually, when I came on board at InventoryLab, my predecessor had kind of started defining what I would call a brand for us, and it was a little flimsy. The really, really locked in thing was the blue that you see everywhere. We actually call it Island Blue, and it's been an absolute mainstay in our colors since before my time. When I came on board with InventoryLab, I had a lot of time at the beginning to do some onboarding and figure out, what do I think my role would be initially, because I came on and I was the only designer. I was doing our advertising materials. I was doing our conference materials. I was designing the software. I was doing all of it. And because of that, and as a result of my background in advertising before I really got into software, I realized that we needed to kind of lock in our brand a little bit and make sure that everything was consistent and well-defined. So I spent a lot of time, probably, I would say halfway through 2016 to the end of the year, kind of building what I called a brand book. And we defined our colors there, spent a lot of time working on things like color theory with that, because if you look at the two main colors that we use, it's the blue, and then there's a complementary color, which is the orange that we use. And it's really specific because they manage to stand out from UI on their own. So when we build our interfaces, if we use those colors or any of the other ones we use, there's a really specific meaning behind each. And that's the best answer I have for that one. I mean, we're always kind of considering new things too, because when we build new interfaces, sometimes we need a color that doesn't have a predecessor. Like when we built the restock report, we had a purple color that we incorporated into our brand that was not present before because we had no need for it. And that purple color is basically, it means out of stock. And we're now using that in both I can't even talk today, the restock report. And then I also brought it into the ScoutX user interface. And if you haven't heard of ScoutX, or if you want to hear about it, I've got another presentation coming the end of the day today where we're going to do a demo. So you should check it out.
Awesome. All right. And actually, Rena has another question. When do you feel a redesign is necessary?
I love Rena's questions. Yeah. All right. I think redesigns in general they're driven by one of two things. The first thing is everybody feels like they need to change. It's usually driven by like marketing professionals or by the higher ups in the company who are just tired of something. And I generally seem to think that that's a really bad reason to redesign. It happens a lot. It even happens in very large brands where they completely rebrand. And I understand the idea of keeping a brand fresh or making people think that you're something new because you have a bad association with an old brand. But overall, I think redesigns become necessary when you want to do something in that interface that you can't do with the current design. A great example is, like I said, when we were rewriting the different areas of Stratify, we wanted to start focusing on making them mobile friendly. And as a result, we've seen the mobile use of Stratify spike in all of those areas where it's actually mobile friendly. People still try to use the older parts of Stratify that we're still working on mobile devices, but generally speaking, it's not very well adopted there. But particularly in areas like Scout and the restock report, our mobile use is probably 300-400% above what it would have been if the design was not mobile friendly. Another great example of a good redesign is when you're working on new functionality and you realize that you're doing something well that you're doing poorly somewhere else. A lot of times those insights into how you're serving your users through the interface come from just an aha moment like that. And it happened when we were working on the restock report and realized like the way that we're doing customizing columns in your tables is a little wonky elsewhere. And that's kind of driving some conversations about, like, well, how can we address this and make it more consistent across our application and more useful?
Okay, great questions, Rena. And don't be shy, guys. If you're watching, like Jesse said, throw out any questions, any comments, what you like about IL design, what you don't like about it. Don't be shy. But in the meantime, we actually have a couple questions for you too. So how do you take accessibility into account for UI design?
That's a great question as well. Accessibility has a lot of faces. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, accessibility means when we design our software, we're working to make sure that people who are disabled, whether it's visually or if they're deaf or if they're working with some other kind of deficit where they have to use an assistive device to navigate the computer, we want to make sure we build an interface that works for them as well. So first steps are really just an accessibility audit. Like we run through an automated process where a piece of software examines things like contrast and proper coding techniques and accessible code properties that are supposed to be there. Basically just tells us, here's the things, the base level of what we expect you to do, and here's where you're failing to do that. And I've run a couple of accessibility audits since I became an InventoryLab employee. And in the beginning, our accessibility was okay, but not great. And ever since then, as we've been building new pieces and reworking old pieces to be more mobile friendly and that kind of thing, then accessibility has improved quite a bit. The other area of accessibility that you really have to take into account when you're doing specifically UI is contrast. There's a lot of folks who have some kind of visual deficit, whether it's just legitimate blindness where they use a screen reader, or someone who might be red-green color blind. And that interestingly enough, in UI design is a really big challenge for a lot of people to overcome, because as designers, particularly if you start in like the print design world or something like that, red and green have really specific connotations, and they really do in UI design as well. But if you have somebody who is red-green colorblind, they really can't tell the difference between the two. They can't tell which is which. So you have to be really careful about designing a UI that doesn't just rely on color as the way to communicate something. So we can't just throw a banner up there that's bright red with no icon on it that also indicates this is a problem. So it's those kinds of thoughts. And contrast comes from color, but it also comes from really intelligent choices when it comes to just words on the page. When we're building a UI and we make something that's too light and hard to read for anybody, then we're definitely creating an issue for people who have visual deficits.
It's something I think
wow, that's really interesting.
It is, and we've become more and more aware of it, because I mean, I imagine, like you were saying, like, back when we started, even, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, designers might not have been thinking about that. It wasn't really, no one was bringing a lot of attention to it.
Well,
but, we have this whole demographic of people that, want to use all the same technology everybody else does, and it's nice that there's attention brought to that now.
And I think it's really important to note too that, I mean, accessibility, like what I do to make things accessible, does change over time as well, based on the kinds of technology that come out to help people who deal with a disability. Screen readers have gotten significantly more advanced in the last decade or so. So people who are browsing the web and happen to be blind can really kind of find more information a lot easier now than they used to be able to. But it really depends both on that technology and on designers and developers like myself, like coding for that technology and making sure that we account for it. So I think that overall, InventoryLab really takes me seriously when I say accessibility is a big thing. I think we have a lot of places where we can still improve, and I think that that's going to be a goal going forward. But overall, one of the things I love about InventoryLab is that they hear all the voices. Like, we're a small company, but we have people who have very strong opinions based on really well-informed information. And there are people here who absolutely listen. If I say something is important, then people are going to trust me as the expert in my side of things, that I know what I'm talking about. And I don't get a lot of pushback for things like that. And it's kind of a refreshing break from my previous experiences, because working in large companies, there's a lot of competing priorities, and I can only do so much in my role. So they would basically say, be quiet. This is your job. You do your job. And if we need to tackle that problem, we'll let Johnny over here do it.
Yes, corporate America.
Oh, wow. Yeah, corporate America.
We know how that goes.
Yeah, that's really cool about accessibility and how much you take that into account. That's really cool. I have someone who loses her vision regularly. I can really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So another question, what's your least favorite design trend?
Oh, man.
There's probably a lot, right?
So many bad design trends, and they're usually driven by somebody who's trying to innovate and just manages to stumble across something that people think, oh, that's a great idea. But generally speaking, I think that in the past maybe 15 years or so, and this is a knock on my previously mentioned hero, Johnny Ive, is something called skeuomorphic design. So I'll define the term. It's essentially trying to create a digital equivalent of a real world object. So let's just imagine you have a website that sells books, and they want to make it look like a book where the page turns. Or they want to make a button look like it's a wood grain button or something like that. And I think that as I've matured as a designer, I've found out that those kinds of trends are more for the designer than they are for the user. And I think that's the wrong kind of trend to follow, because we're just kind of we're indulging ourselves, like, oh, this would be so cool if we do this, and it would be so cool if we do that, and this button should have like 10 different states, and it should flash when it's supposed to do a certain thing and all that. And it's just us as designers having fun. But when I'm a designer and I'm working for our users, I want to make decisions that benefit them. And if it's something that I'm spending my time on where it has no benefit other than, hey, I think that looks cool, it's a bad design trend. And there's a lot of trends that do that. Like skeuomorphic design is just one example, but like the obsession with like completely unreadable fonts on like big website banners on their homepages is another one that really bugs me, because again, I mean, we're talking about accessibility, we're talking about ease of use. And if we throw something in there that looks pretty, but you're like, it almost looks like graffiti, I can't read it, then it makes no sense.
Yeah. And I can see that there's a temptation to want to do that.
Absolutely.
When you have access to all these cool things you can do, but you're right, the end user isn't going to appreciate it necessarily the same way the designer will. So,
yep.
All right.
Speaking of fonts, though.
Oh,
I was going to say.
I just wanted to remind everyone
fonts,
real quick. We do have a couple minutes if you want to throw any questions at Jesse. So.
Oh man.
Yeah, please throw any questions. But in the meantime, what do you think of Comic Sans and Papyrus?
So
what do you think is worse, Comic Sans or Papyrus? Which ones do you think is worse?
They are offenders in different categories. I started my passion for design and typography, and I spent a lot of time studying really great type can't even talk today, type houses, and they're companies that create typefaces. And there's a lot of thought and a lot of deliberate things done in fonts that are just really unnoticed, but really valuable. And Comic Sans and Papyrus break every single rule when it comes to typeface design. But generally speaking, I think they get really widely used simply because they're available on so many devices. And thankfully, I think Papyrus's day has come and gone. But Comic Sans is like, it's like a cockroach. It just won't go away.
Isn't it?
It's everywhere. It's on every device. It's just, you can't get away from it. And every now and then, some young person will think that it's this cool, ironic, slightly ugly font. Hey, I'll use Comic Sans and be funny. And as a designer, I mean, I get the humor. But I wish those two would go to the boneyard. I really do.
Yeah, Comic Sans seems like
especially non-iPhone users. Yeah.
What's that?
I was thinking about like Android users, how they can customize their font. Like how Android users can customize their font, and I've seen them do it to Comic Sans, and it just burns my eyes. I don't know how you can do that. Just have your entire phone type in Comic Sans.
Luckily, I managed to.
Oh my goodness.
Apple person for so long, I don't even have to deal with that. My kids all have iPhones. I use a Mac. I have iPads. Like, that doesn't show up here, and I'm happy for that, because I can understand why Apple's really strict about their design guidelines, and I understand the temptation of being able to customize things like you can in Android. But man, there can be some bad things happening if people go a little too crazy with that.
We do have a few minutes left. If
any
anyone's
other questions from the audience,
any questions at all, don't be shy.
Going once, going twice.
Come on. That's right.
3 times.
Let's do one more. Let's do one more of our questions then.
That's fine.
All right.
Those are good questions.
Okay. Let's see. How about this one? What was your most challenging non-InventoryLab design project?
I like that one too. I think that it was probably it was my previous job, actually. I was working for a company called Modia, and they're a software development firm in Blacksburg, which is about 25 minutes from where I live in Salem, Virginia. And a couple of my clients, we had large scale, like corporate clients. I worked with Aveda and I worked with Prudential, and I did a little bit of work for a couple different medical schools. But the most challenging one, probably by far, is that from a design standpoint, was working with Aveda on. We specifically work with the Aveda Beauty School, like their academies where they train stylists, and we were trying to create for them an internal piece of software to use that would be utilized in all of their schools that allow them to share resources. Basically, resources meaning like digital assets, files, videos that they wanted to be able to use in classes in all of their different schools and that kind of thing. And it was supposed to be very collaborative. And I don't think it was challenging because it was a fairly complex design to create. It was challenging because the whole project was run in a very different way than the projects that I work on now at InventoryLab. It was what I hate to call design by committee. Essentially, you have probably 20 or 30 different stakeholders on the project, and you have no way to choose which priority to actually build into the design. And you have a lot of competing priorities, and it's not a great way to create design, because it means that everyone thinks that their opinion is the only one. And they don't understand that the end result is to create something that everybody can use. And as a designer, those puzzles are hard enough for me to solve when I have more than 10 users. And obviously we have a lot more here at IL, so I like those challenges. But I think that good design happens when you have a few smart people calling the actual shots and everyone else providing those smart people information that they can use to make their decisions. But when you have everyone trying to say, this is what the design is going to be, and there's more than a few people saying that, then it really becomes hard to create good design. Eventually that project ended up being great. Like it was great because we kind of found our way back to that. And we had a couple people at Aveda. I went to Minneapolis and sat down with a few of them in kind of an actual literal roundtable session. And we just talked about why things weren't going as well as we wanted them to. And they were really, really able to listen. And then they're like, you know what, we probably should do that. And then they just kind of took the ball and ran with it from there. And the project got back on its feet. And we ended up with a really nice piece of software. But end story being like that, the designs are challenging for different reasons. Sometimes we have hard problems to solve, and sometimes we have hard people to work with. Luckily, I don't have that problem here at IL, but I think that the main challenge as a designer should be to focus on how we meet our users' needs. Like, how do we make the things that they have to do with our software as easy as humanly possible?
Absolutely.
Sounds like a lot of clashing of egos.
Oh, I'm sure there are.
That's what it sounds like, a bunch of clashing of egos in your project. Holy cow.
All right. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. That was a great presentation. Thank you, Rena, for the great questions. And as Jesse said, you can direct message him. You can send him a direct message during the event if you have any questions that you want to reach out and ask him about as far as IL design, things you like, things you don't like. And we're going to be doing some trivia over on the main stage with Andrea in just a little bit, so stay tuned for that. And Jesse, thank you again, and we'll see you a little bit later.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Jesse.
Bye.